All right, everyone. Welcome to the Good Tenant Certification Program provided by the Randolph County Housing Authority Social Services Department. Some of the goals of this course are to provide you with basic knowledge to successfully find a roommate, locate housing, understand your rental agreement, and increase the likelihood of receiving your security deposit and a positive rental reference in the future. Another goal is to assist landlords in recognizing that a prospective resident has the basic understanding of their housing obligations and expectations. The estimated time for this course is anywhere between 60 to 90 minutes, including the quiz at the end. After reading this document or going through this PowerPoint, you will be prompted to answer 20 questions to demonstrate your comprehension of the material. A passing score of 80% or greater will result in your obtaining a certificate of completion that you can use when applying to housing properties in Randolph and surrounding West Virginia counties. The information contained in this course is intended to provide you with general guidance, but should not be construed as legal advice. Laws are modified and changed on a regular basis, and certain topics are subject to legal interpretation. If you feel you need clarification or assistance, you are advised to consult an attorney. Before you rent, this section will provide helpful information that you will need as you begin your rental search. You will identify tools to choose a roommate and determine if a specific property fits your specific needs. First, there are some basic questions to ask yourself. What can you afford in terms of rent? How long is the term of the lease, and does that fit your specific needs? Do you want a place by yourself, or do you want roommates? Where and in what area of town do you want to live? What do you want to be close to? Does your neighborhood have ample parking or easy transportation access? Do you own a pet, and will the property even allow pets? What kind of transportation will you need? What is your lifestyle? Are you quiet, socially active, or a little bit of both? Are you old enough to sign a lease? You are required to be 18 years or older to sign a lease. Do you have the deposit money for the unit and utilities? And also, have you done a household monthly budget to figure out what you can afford? When choosing your roommate, there are some more specific questions that you need to ask yourself. First, do you require a quiet household? Consider your privacy needs. Do you have similar social habits? Are your feelings on drinking, smoking, and drug use compatible? Will your roommates have regular overnight guests? Will someone want to have pets? Does your landlord even allow pets? And if you both have pets, will your pets get along? Do you have similar housekeeping habits? It may seem silly, but a very common cause of dispute is personal tidiness and cleanliness expectations. An important thing to note is that your best friend doesn't always make your best roommate. You may find out that you are too alike or not as alike as you thought, and you may butt heads on certain topics. And then the last thing to consider is TV and internet, those additional entities. Do you want the same type of service? How much is each party willing to pay, etc. When choosing your location, there are even more questions to ask. Will you be able to access the services that you need conveniently during all types of weather conditions from your home? This means, can you get to the grocery store? Can you get to places where you need to pay your bills? Can you get to a hospital if necessary? Does the landlord or property you are considering have a good reputation amongst their current residents? Does your location allow pets? It's very important to check that before moving a pet in. And do they allow smoking in the unit or even outside of the unit? Do you have adequate money to cover upfront costs required before move-in? And what extra expenses should you expect to cover over and above your rental cost? Does the neighborhood you are considering fit your lifestyle? What is the average cost of utilities in that area? Will you be expected to pay a utility deposit? To find out some past costs and deposit costs, you can call local utilities, or you may be able to speak to the landlord over the property to see what past tenants have paid for that utility. There are a lot of resources that are designed to assist you in locating housing. Private social networking sites like Craigslist and Facebook are very popular, but use caution when utilizing social networking sites, as they're typically not monitored for accuracy, nor do they ensure safe matches. You may not find the most ideal unit for you on Facebook. Please be wary of housing discrimination. Housing discrimination can take on a variety of forms. Under the West Virginia Fair Housing Act and Federal Fair Housing Act, it is unlawful for a landlord, managing agent, real estate broker, or salesperson to discriminate against any person because of the person's race, color, national origin, religion, sex, including pregnancy, childbirth, or medical conditions related to them, as well as gender, perception of gender, and sexual orientation, disability, blindness, ancestry, or familial status, such as the presence of children in the household, marital status, or age, in any of the following ways: refusing to sell, rent, or lease to that individual, refusing to negotiate for a sale, rental, or lease, representing that housing is not available for inspection, sale, or rental when it is in fact available, otherwise denying or withholding housing accommodations, providing inferior housing terms, conditions, privileges, facilities, and/or services, harassing a person in connection with housing accommodations, or canceling or terminating a sale or rental agreement because of a protected class or status. While I wish that were all of them, they may also provide segregated or separated housing accommodations for these protected classes, and they could possibly refuse to permit a person with a disability at the person with a disability's own expense to make reasonable modifications to a rental unit that are necessary to allow the person with a disability full enjoyment of the premises. As a condition of making the modifications, the landlord may require that the person with the disability to enter into an agreement to restore the interior of the rental unit to its previous condition at the end of tenancy, excluding normal wear and tear. Refusing to make reasonable accommodations in rules, policies, practices, or services when necessary to allow a person with a disability equal opportunity to use and enjoy a dwelling is, in fact, housing discrimination. The West Virginia eviction process differs from most other state eviction laws, and the landlord may not need to provide any kind of advance notice to the tenant prior to filing an eviction if the eviction is for non-payment of rent or for violation of a material provision in the rental agreement. If the landlord has suitable grounds for eviction, he or she may proceed directly to court by filing and serving a wrongful occupation or unlawful retainer action. As mentioned, most evictions are for non-payment of rent. However, a landlord can also try to evict a tenant for a breach of a provision in the signed rental agreement that clearly sets forth what the tenant may or may not do. These include the following: having unauthorized people living in the unit, having an unauthorized pet, selling, possessing, or manufacturing controlled substances on the property, engaging in offensive conduct that affects the health and safety of other tenants, substantially damaging the property, denying access to the landlord despite reasonable and sufficient notice, and expiration of the lease. In West Virginia, there is a thing called self-help evictions. A landlord is prohibited from taking any direct or indirect actions to remove a tenant from a rental unit. If a tenant refuses to leave, a tenant may only be removed from a rental unit by law enforcement with a valid order from a West Virginia court. The landlords may not deny access to the property by changing the locks or intimidating the tenant, having utilities and essential services terminated, or by entering the unit and removing the tenant or tenant's personal property. Such actions may subject the landlord to liability for damages to the tenant for any costs incurred. Also, a lease agreement may not require a tenant to waive the right to a jury trial. Such a provision is not enforceable because it provides the tenant of due process of law. Notice is required when terminating tenancy. Written notice by the landlord of the desire to terminate a tenancy is required if there's no written lease agreement. If there's no written lease agreement, the landlord does not need a reason for the eviction, but must provide one rental period of notice, for example, 1 full month's rent if the tenant pays their rent monthly. So what do you do after you've found your ideal home and roommates? Some things to think about include: does your rental agreement apply to just your room, or do you have any obligations to the common living area? Does your lease have joint and several liability terminology? If so, understand that you may be obligated for your personal obligations as well as the obligations of everyone else that you live with. Make sure you read and understand all of the house rules. Recognize that not complying with these rules could result in your eviction and substantial financial penalties. Obtain renter's insurance. If the living area in your home is damaged by fire, water, or smoke, or if your personal items are stolen, you will not be protected unless you have renter's insurance. I will touch on this topic a few more times throughout this presentation, as we do believe it's incredibly important. Finally, agree to a move-in date that works for you, your roommates, and your landlord. The contract you sign at move-in is a financial obligation that should be very well understood before signing on the bottom line. Before finalizing and signing the contract, one should review the landlord's leasing policies carefully and ask questions. The relationship between renter and landlord is the beginning of a relationship that will impact you for years to come and will in large part determine if landlords will be willing to rent to you again in the future. So what is a roommate agreement? A lease generally defines only the legal relationship between the tenant and their landlord, but a roommate agreement can help much more within the house, within your roommates. You should consider developing a roommate agreement between your individual roommates because this type of agreement can assist you in working through many of the common problems that often plague roommates during the course of their lease. Any roommate agreement must be in writing and signed by both parties to be enforceable. Some examples of things that may be included in a roommate agreement: the amounts of each portion of rent and utility that each individual has to pay, when those are due by, the individual who will actually be making that payment, the division of household chores and responsibilities, and the clear understanding of what is a common area and what is private space. So while you rent, your new living arrangement comes with rights and responsibilities that are consistent with the rental agreement that you signed. West Virginia state law and the expectation that you comply with the laws and good neighbor expectations associated with being a member of the community are important to keep in mind. West Virginia state law establishes standards that landlords are required to meet as it relates to their tenants' living conditions. Habitable living conditions and expectations for repairs within those areas are defined by West Virginia Code Chapter 37, Real Property, Article 6, Landlord and Tenant. The code reads that the landlord is to deliver the premises, duty to maintain the premises in fit and habitable condition with respect to the residential property. Landlord shall, at the commencement of tenancy, deliver the dwelling unit and surrounding premises in a fit and habitable condition, and shall thereafter maintain the leased property in such condition, and maintain the leased property in a condition that meets requirements of applicable health, safety, fire, and housing codes, unless the failure to meet those requirements is the fault of the tenant, a member of his family, or other person on the premises with his consent. And in multiple housing units, keep clean, safe, and in repair all common areas of the premises remaining under his control that are maintained for the use and benefit of his tenants. Make all repairs necessary to keep the premises in a fit and habitable condition unless said repairs were necessitated primarily by a lack of reasonable care by the tenant, a member of his family, or another person on the premises with his consent. And maintain in good and safe working order and condition all electrical, plumbing, sanitary, heating, ventilating, air conditioning, and other facilities and appliances, including elevators, supplied or required to be supplied by him by written or oral agreement or by law. And in multiple housing units, provide and maintain appropriate conveniences for the removal of ashes, garbage, rubbish, and other waste incidental to the occupancy of the dwelling unit. With respect to dwelling units supplied by direct public utility connections, the landlord must supply running water and reasonable amounts of hot water at all times, and reasonable heat between October 1st and the last day of April, except where the dwelling unit is so constructed that running water, heat, or hot water is generated by an installation within the exclusive control of the tenant. If a landlord's duty under this rental agreement exceeds a duty imposed by this section of the law, that portion of the rental agreement imposing a greater duty shall control. None of the provisions of this section shall be deemed to require the landlord to make repairs when the tenant is in arrears and in payment of rent. For the purposes of this section, the term multiple housing unit shall mean a dwelling which contains a room or group of rooms located within a building or structure forming more than one habitable unit for occupants for living, sleeping, eating, and cooking. That was a lot all at once, but those are under West Virginia law, landlord's rights and responsibilities in terms of keeping the unit habitable. Now there are some rights as a tenant as well. This means that you are deserving of plumbing in good working order, including running water, heating systems in good working order from October 1st to April 30th, electric and gas systems in good working order, at least one working toilet, wash basin, and bathtub or shower, and working smoke detectors. Next, we'll talk about some reasons why a landlord may need to enter your home. In West Virginia, landlords should not enter a rented apartment without either the consent of the tenant or without reasonable notice. However, there are no notice requirements in the West Virginia Code. In most cases, 24 hours notice is considered reasonable. A written lease agreement may add or specify additional requirements or rules for the landlord or the tenant in terms of the landlord entering the home. And a landlord may enter at any time in an emergency or to perform emergency repairs. Some examples for this include to check the electric and gas systems. Again, in an emergency, this could be if there's a fire or a dangerous gas leak in the unit. When the tenant has moved out or has abandoned their rental unit, to make necessary or agreed upon repairs, decorations, alterations, or other improvements, to show the rental unit to prospective tenants, purchasers, or lenders, to provide entry to contractors or workers performing work on the unit, or to conduct initial inspection before the end of tenancy. If a court order permits the landlord to enter, or if a written lease allows the landlord to enter for any other reason. Landlord-tenant communication is very important. Good communication with one's landlord or potential landlord is very valuable, perhaps just as important as having good communication with your neighbors. It's all too easy to burn bridges that can burn people for a lifetime. Landlords are able to offer references for future rental situations, so you should definitely be communicative with your landlord. The landlord relationship, as I've said, is a very important relationship that can follow you throughout your life and affect one's ability to get another lease with the same or a different landlord in the future. When negotiating an issue with your landlord, even if you're very angry, it's important to stay composed and discuss the issue peacefully. Starting a conversation with "I'm going to sue you" isn't the most effective way to communicate with the landlord to get issues resolved, and improper communication styles can hinder the landlord-tenant relationship and hinder your ability to remain in a residence for years to come. Good communication with landlords could possibly help you get the fastest responses to requests and even keep your rent more reasonable. Make sure you're being honest and accurate on your rental applications, because lying about any credit issues could cause far more trouble. Lying about anything may cause issues, actually, including lying about having a pet. Good communication with the landlord can resolve some of these credit challenges when explanations are provided. And make sure you're asking leading questions to make sure that you know the place where you're renting is where you want to live. If there's an agreement about something like a repair, always try to get that in writing so you have a paper trail for any changes that may be made to the unit. If you have concerns about communication with your landlord, again, you should do that in writing. If you choose to use texting or communication over an app, be careful with your tone. Reread your messages to make sure they're accurate and intentional before sending them, and take screenshots or ensure that you don't delete that conversation. Finally, make sure you read the lease carefully in order to know what responsibilities you have and what legally binding agreements that the tenant has made for repairs, upkeep, and the like. Whenever possible, make sure you're connecting with your neighbors on a positive note. Conflict resolution is very important, and making sure that you're resolving conflicts in a pleasant way will help with communication going forward. Introduce yourself in the mailbox, inform your neighbors of any events or activities that can affect them. For example, if you're having a party or building a fence outside, make sure you let them know about that noise. Potentially, if you build that good relationship, you may be able to solve many more problems down the road. Consider how placing things like cars or garbage interrupts the view of neighbors from their home. And the simple rule of thumb is to treat your neighbors how you'd like to be treated, quite frankly. Renters tend to come from different age groups, different ethnic backgrounds, and different ways of living. So it's important to be aware of how to interact with your various neighbors. And if your neighbors do something nice, it's great to let them know they feel appreciated. When a problem arises with your neighbors, it's really easy to assume that they know there's a problem, but that might not be the case. So it always helps to try to have a peaceful and meted conversation with your neighbors before going at them and arguing. Sometimes neighbors will unintentionally strike a nerve, so it really can't be assumed that someone knows other people's intentions. If something they do bothers you, or if something you do bothers them, it's much better to bring that up respectfully than to start an argument. If someone accuses one of wrongdoing, it can be very easy to be on the defense, but listening to what a person has to say can go a long way to diffusing a situation. Sometimes a simple apology and acknowledgement for an action can be the beginning of a positive communication lesson. It's important to remember that problems aren't people, and people aren't usually the problem. Listening when discussing a problem and repeating back what is heard can make someone who's upset suddenly feel heard. And often in a difficult communication situation, it can be made into a positive communication. Finally, if someone is too angry to talk it out, see if you can meet at another time to discuss the situation and resolve the conflict in an effort to have time to calm down and think more constructively about how to communicate without conflict. I'd like to give an example as to why this communication, not only with your landlord, but with your neighbors as well, is so important. I mentioned you may want to throw a party in your home. And if you give your if you give your neighbor a good heads up about that party and you have a good relationship with them prior, if they find that they're about to file a noise complaint or something is upsetting them regarding the party, they may call you first rather than calling the police to come quiet the party down. And that can just avoid a lot of problems. When moving in, always request a walkthrough to see if there are any damages. Take pictures of everything when you move in, all areas of the house, and make sure that you keep them in a safe place for the duration of your tenancy. If there are any major issues that the landlord says that he or she will fix prior to moving in or shortly after, ask to get that confirmation in writing or send a letter confirming that conversation. Ask for a copy of the walkthrough documents and inspections to keep with your records and those photos you took, and keep those in a safe place. Ensure that you have all of the property information, such as utility information, when garbage day is, your mailbox number, how to get into locked gates, alarm instructions, and other important things to know. And make sure you ask the landlord how to best make contact with them to ask questions or request repairs. Just because your landlord has a cell phone, they may not like being texted. They may prefer phone calls. During your tenancy, there are some very, very important things to do. One of those is to pay your rent on time. On time is the due date, not the grace period. Often landlords will include a few extra days after the due date for rent to allow people to get that money if they don't have it. But please, please, please try to pay your rent on time. Going back to that landlord-tenant communication, if you have a good relationship and if you're communicating well with your landlord, you may be able to explain to them that, hey, I know the rent's due on Wednesday, but I don't get paid until Friday. Is there any way that you could be gracious with me for 2 days until I get you the rent? And more often than not, if you have that positive relationship and that positive communication, your landlord will be willing to work with you. Make sure you're being reasonable with your requests. I mean, don't promise someone rent the month after. Get them that rent as soon as you can. And the landlord, maintenance person, and anyone else who works on the property where we live, they really can make our lives easier and our rental experiences more pleasant. Communicating pleasantly with everyone involved really, really goes a long way in making for a happy tenancy. There are some tenant responsibilities, and your responsibilities while living in your home should be spelled out clearly in your lease. These items include, but are not limited to, again, paying your rent on time, specified within your lease and in a manner as required by your lease. Obtaining renter's insurance, I mentioned that I would be going back to this, is very important. Complying with house or community policies included within your lease. Reporting any damages to your landlord that could create a safety concern or make your home uninhabitable. Keep your home in a clean condition to ensure that no long-term property damage is created, and be a good neighbor. On the opposite end of that spectrum, there are landlord responsibilities as well. When a landlord rents property to a tenant as a place to live, again, the property must be in a habitable condition. Habitable means fit to live in. Uninhabitable means not fit to live in. The landlord must repair problems that make the property uninhabitable, except for problems caused by the tenant or tenant's guests, children, or pets. In order for the property to be habitable, it must have all of the following: effective waterproofing and weather protection of roof and exterior walls, including unbroken windows and doors; plumbing facilities in good working order, including running water and an appropriate sewage disposal system; gas facilities in good working order; heating facilities in good working order from October 1st through April 30th, An electrical system, including lighting, wiring, and equipment in good working order. Clean and sanitary buildings, grounds, and appurtenances, for example, a garden or detached garage, which are free from debris, filth, rubbish, garbage, rodents, and vermin. Adequate trash receptacles in good repair. Floors, stairways, and railings in good repair. In addition, the rented property must have all of the following: a working toilet, wash basin, and bathtub or shower, a kitchen with a sink, which cannot be made of an absorbent material such as wood, safe fire or emergency exits leading to a street or hallway. Stairs, hallways, and exits must be kept litter-free. Storage areas, garages, and basements must be kept free of combustible materials, and working smoke detectors in all units of multi-unit buildings such as duplexes and apartment complexes. These are minimum requirements. Other conditions may make the rented property not habitable. For example, the rented property may not be habitable if it does not substantially comply with building and housing code standards that materially affect the tenant's health and safety. According to the West Virginia Department of Consumer Protection, a tenant must take reasonable care of the rented property in common areas such as hallways. This means that the tenant must keep those areas in good condition. A tenant must also repair all damage that he or she causes or that is caused by the tenant's guests, children, or pets. Being a good tenant requires all of the following. If the tenant does not perform these duties and causes the property to become uninhabitable, the tenant cannot require the landlord to repair the property to make it habitable. So let's go through some of these responsibilities. 1, keeping the premises as clean and sanitary as the condition of the premises permits. Use and operate gas, electrical, and plumbing fixtures properly. Examples of improper use include overloading electrical outlets, flushing large foreign objects down the toilet, and allowing any gas, electrical, or plumbing fixture to become filthy. Dispose of your trash and garbage in a clean and sanitary manner. Do not destroy, damage, or deface the premises or allow anyone else to do so. Do not remove any part of the structure, dwelling unit, facilities, equipment, or appurtenances, or allow anyone else to do so. Use the premises as a place to live and use the rooms for their proper purposes. For example, the bedroom must be used as a bedroom and not as a kitchen. And make sure you notify your landlord when in a timely manner of any damage or malfunctions with any utility systems. The tenant cannot require the landlord to repair the property if the tenant substantially interferes with the landlord's ability to repair defects. An example of this is not allowing the landlord's electrician to enter the apartment to fix faulty wiring. In addition, the landlord is not obligated to repair any damages caused by the tenant's own carelessness, such as a toilet that doesn't flush because the tenant's child flushed a sock down it. How to pay your rent is a very important section. The most common method of rent payment is a personal check. This method is often preferred as by cashing the check, a receipt of payment is automatically created. Make sure to pay your rent on time to avoid a late charge and possible additional legal fees. For a moment, we'll go over how to write a personal check. Place the landlord's name or property management company name as described in your lease after pay to the order of. Date the check in the upper right-hand corner. Write the amount of the check to the right of the dollar sign. Write the alphabetical monetary amount of the check below the pay to the order line. Sign on the line in the bottom right corner of the check and place your rental address in the memo section of the check. There are other methods to be able to pay your rent, and these can include paying by cash, but make sure you get a receipt of the payment and keep that with your records. You could pay your rent electronically. Many property owners now allow you to set up an electronic rental payment that is deducted from your checking account automatically each month. Other forms of electronic payments include bank bill pay and EFT services. Venmo and PayPal are also options, but remember to save your proof of payment. A cashier's check is a check issued by your bank that guarantees your payment. There is typically a charge for your bank to issue a cashier's check, or you could get a money order. If you don't have a checking account, you can purchase a money order from a grocery store, post office, or check cashing establishment. Money orders are typically purchased with cash and may have a maximum limit, and they are typically considered an acceptable form of payment. Always keep your receipt in the event that you need to prove at a later date that you paid with cash, PayPal, Venmo, money order, or other forms of payment. There's an emphasis on that paper trail. Make sure you have that documentation. The next topic that we're going to cover is safety. While everyone would like to believe that their home is safe, taking precautions may prevent an unwanted intruder. It's important not to allow strangers to stay in your home because you are ultimately responsible for your guests' actions. Some basic safety techniques include locking your house and windows when you or your roommates are not home, taking pictures of your belongings so that if you do suffer a loss, you have proof of your ownership, and try to keep a list of serial numbers for items that have manufacturer's serial numbers. This is another way to prove ownership for those items. Obtain renter's insurance. Again, a detailed summary is included in this section. The cost of renter's insurance can usually be shared by all of your roommates and will provide invaluable if your belongings are stolen and if you have pictures of those belongings. Remember, your landlord's insurance will typically not cover your losses resulting from fire, flood, or burglary. Make sure you know if your landlord offers any additional safety features at the property, such as gates, security patrol, or bike storage. Cooking and grease fires are the #1 cause of household fires. In the event of a grease fire, smother the flame with the lid of a pan or use baking soda, not powder. Never put water on a grease fire and never discharge a fire extinguisher onto a pan, as both of these methods can actually spread the fire. Next, we're going to show a video to see this in action. And that is exactly why it's so important to either smother that fire or put that baking, I apologize, I don't want to tell you wrong, baking soda, not powder, on the fire. It's important to maintain a clean home, as we've mentioned. Keep your home clean and clutter-free has many advantages. Avoiding mildew may keep you and your roommates healthier. Sweeping and mopping floors and keeping your kitchen free of dirty dishes on a regular basis will also limit the likelihood for you to invite unwanted guests, i.e. insects, into your home. Cleaning your bathroom limits the spread of disease, and keeping drains clear of hair prevents clogged drains that can lead to very expensive plumbing bills that may be charged to you. And finally, the cleaner you maintain your home, the easier it will be to return your home to its original condition, and the higher the likelihood is that you will receive some of your security deposit back when you move out. We mentioned bringing in unwanted guests. It's very important not to pick up furniture that one doesn't know where it's been. Often unwanted furniture and items are thrown away due to issues such as bed bugs and lice, and these can infest your home. If there's an occurrence of bed bugs, often all furniture, including beds, must be thrown away. The house must be bug bombed, and everything must be carefully washed to ensure that the pests don't spread. Bed bugs and lice can create serious environmental and health problems. If bed bugs are found, contact the landlord right away so that measures can be taken immediately to eliminate them before they spread to other living spaces. Bed bug infestations across the nation have led to an increased focus in state legislatures because they can live in clothes, beds, couches, and other upholstered items. They're not known to carry disease, but they can, however, cause rashes and allergic reactions. A U.S. study has found that bed bugs have been found to have the drug-resistant bacterium known as MRSA. The EPA suggests that there is no single treatment or technique that's effective for getting rid of bed bugs. It suggests that bed bugs can be controlled by using a variety of techniques, which include prevention, monitoring, proper use of pesticides, and other integrated pest management techniques. So what do you do if you have bed bugs? Again, contact your landlord immediately so that they can get in, pest control individuals, and bug bomb the unit, and begin cleaning all of your items. Once it's determined that you have bed bugs, it's important to remove the clutter where they may hide, seal any cracks, encase your mattresses, vacuum everything, conduct heat treatments, and carefully use pesticide products explicitly approved for bed bugs. These will often be monitored and controlled by your landlord. A security deposit is any money a landlord takes from the tenant other than the advance payment of rent. The security deposit serves to protect the landlord if the tenant breaks or violates the terms of the lease or rental agreement or damages the property. A landlord is able to deduct certain things from the tenant's security deposit, including past due rent, which can include reasonable charges for a late payment of rent if specified in a lease agreement, the payment of any damages that the landlord has suffered because of the tenant's non-compliance with the lease agreement or damages to the property excluding reasonable wear and tear, the cost of unpaid utilities that were billed to and paid by the landlord if the tenant had the obligation under the lease agreement to pay them, the payment and reasonable cost of storage and removal of any abandoned property, and any other damages or charges specified in a lease agreement. Do not assume that your security deposit is designed to cover your last month's rent. That is not the purposes of a security deposit. There is no law that requires the landlord to credit the security deposit to cover a past due rent obligation. If damages or charges exceed the amount of the security deposit, the landlord must give you written notice of that fact. If damages exceed the security deposit amount, the landlord may file a cause of action against you for the remaining amount. After the tenant moves out, the landlord generally has 60 days to return the tenant's security deposit by mail or personally give it to the tenant. Under West Virginia law, the landlord must return your security deposit to you along with an itemized list of any deductions or charges. You should make sure that your landlord has a forwarding address to provide you with this information. For that initial walkthrough we mentioned, it's really important to take into consideration a number of rental factors. Take a camera to document any visible issues and keep the digital or physical photos in a safe place to demonstrate how the unit looked before you moved in. It's helpful to spend some time in the neighborhood before signing the lease, and even in the unit if possible, to know if it's the right fit. Determine if the building has utilities that are metered individually or together, and to determine how all utilities will be paid, and ask for an estimate of the costs. Often there are places online to review properties, and it's very important to walk through an actual unit, not just a model of the unit. Make sure you also check out that lease agreement before even signing it to determine if the agreement is appropriate because it is legally binding. So during that walkthrough, as we mentioned, take a camera to document any visible issues and research the utilities to make sure that you have a full understanding of this unit before you move in. The next section will cover some maintenance items. Things break from time to time and need to be repaired. That's just the way life is. Sometimes you'll be the cause, and other times things just wear out and need to be repaired or replaced. The most important thing to remember is to notify your landlord of maintenance items early to avoid additional damages and possible increased charges. In terms of plumbing, you may flush too much toilet paper or feminine hygiene products down the toilet, and these can cause soft clogs. If a landlord determines that you were the cause for a clog, you may be responsible for the plumbing costs. When it comes to garbage disposals, make sure you're using a strong flow of cold water when using your disposal, and let the water run until all the grinding has taken place and the remains have had a chance to run through the sink drain. Now, when coming to the smoke alarm, make sure you never, ever, ever disconnect a smoke or carbon monoxide alarm. If you are having a problem with these alarms, let your landlord know, as they are intended to save lives. If it's beeping because the battery's low and you're tired of that beeping, please do not take the battery out. If you cannot afford a battery, reach out to your landlord. More often than not, they may be willing to provide it for the safety of their unit that they have. In terms of moisture damage, if you happen to notice any moisture damage forming, attempt to clean it with a common household disinfectant. If you determine that the damage is caused by a leak in the building's exterior walls or roof, make sure you notify your landlord immediately. If you lose your keys, landlords sometimes have different policies relating to lost keys. You may be charged a fee for lockout services, so make sure you keep your keys in a safe and secure place. If you feel as though you don't have enough keys to your unit, have a conversation with your landlord about that. Landlords may be willing to allow you to create an additional key, provided that they know how many keys exist and that they receive all of those keys at move out. When it comes to yard upkeep, if you have a yard, make sure you know if you or your landlord is responsible for the upkeep, such as mowing and leaf clearing. Are you a good neighbor? And what can you do to be a good neighbor? Make sure you're taking pride in where you live. Neighborhood wellness is the willingness of people to see past themselves as individuals and consider how each person impacts one another collectively while living in proximity to one another. Good communication between residents and neighbors can improve the quality and character of your neighborhood and enhance your experience. See the conflict resolution section for more ideas about assertive communication and how to be a good neighbor when conflict arises. Waste receptacles are an important thing to pay attention to when choosing a new unit. Make sure you have an understanding of where your waste goes and what day it's picked up. Make sure you're placing outside for collection the night before your scheduled pickup time, and return your bin to the storage area by the end of your collection day. If you live in an apartment, find out where to throw out trash and do not overload or block dumpsters. If your dumpster is overflowing, contact your landlord immediately. When recycling, be sure to break down boxes and only place recyclable items in the recycling bin. Weeds and lawns should be cut and trimmed and the waste disposed of properly. If your landlord pays a third party to perform the service, notify the landlord that the service provider is not performing as they should. Sometimes lease agreements specify that any vehicle parked on the premises must be properly insured, registered, and titled. Make sure that if such terms are included in your lease, you keep your vehicles in compliance. If you don't, your landlord may tow your vehicle away at your expense. Most housing provides parking, but these spaces are typically limited. If you can walk or ride your bike, you'll typically find that not having a car is actually a better option. Never leave anything of value in your car, either day or night. It's just a matter of time before someone will vandalize your car and you will lose your belongings. If you have a car with an out-of-state registration, know that if the car is in West Virginia for more than 9 months, you may be required to register your car in West Virginia. In certain circumstances, the Department of Motor Vehicles will issue an interstate registration during your temporary residency, but you will need to contact the DMV for more details. Make sure you check in with your local government commission on any noise ordinances that are intended to keep its neighborhoods peaceful and quiet and discourage the highly disruptive nature of excessive noise. You can avoid a noise ordinance violation by being a responsible party host, avoiding party crashers, and keeping your party indoors with your windows closed. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but it's always a good idea to let your neighbors know in advance and give them your cell phone number so they can alert you of an emergency. They may be able to just tell you to tone it down a little bit instead of calling the police to show up at your unit. And we are talking about renter's insurance again, because this is my favorite topic. A landlord's insurance policy does not cover your personal property, clothes, furniture, jewelry, computers, sound system, etc. against destruction or loss. Renter's insurance is also called home and contents insurance and covers your belongings from theft and damage. And here are some things that you might not know about renter's insurance. This can provide protection against losses from fire or smoke, vandalism, theft, explosion, or water damage from plumbing. Renter's insurance will help cover additional living expenses if you have to move into temporary quarters because your home has been damaged. Renter's insurance also provides personal liability coverage if one of your guests is injured while visiting you and your pet attacks them and they sue you. And yes, this does happen. Finally, renter's insurance is relatively inexpensive, and when the cost is shared amongst your roommates, it's probably less than the cost of a cup of coffees each month. Excuse me, throat's getting a little dry. Your rental history is important to you. You may not realize how important a good rental reference is until you go to apply for your next home and discover that local landlords share past rental histories with one another. For this reason, it's very important to communicate and cooperate well with your landlords and neighbors to ensure that you receive a favorable rental reference. Many companies will contact past landlords and ask if you paid your rent on time and if you were a good tenant. If your rental reference is not good, you'll find it difficult to overcome the bad reference and secure future housing. Take your rental reference as seriously as you take your credit reference because they are equally important. There are ways to correct a poor rental history. This includes purchasing a rental history report for yourself and examining the report for incorrect information. Try to fix any negative aspects of that report that are true and petition to have old evictions removed if possible. Have outdated information removed and convince beneficial previous landlords to report for the programs. If you left a tenancy where you knew you had a good relationship with that landlord, make sure that they're vouching for you. And also include a cover letter with your application. This may allow you to explain some of the situations that you've gone through that caused that poor rental history. And it is still possible to rent with a poor rental history even without making those corrections necessarily. Including that cover letter with your application, again, explains the situation that you were in and how you resolved it. You may be able to get personal references in your cover letter. You could try to find a co-signer for your lease. This is someone who has a better rental history, who's kind of taking that responsibility with you. Offer to pay in advance or offer a larger security deposit if you can. This may sway the landlord to accept your tenancy. You could also offer to pay more in rent. Providing proof of employment and your pay stubs can help your landlord determine whether or not this is feasible for you. And you could also suggest using direct payments so that the landlord isn't worried about you being late on your rent. Finally, you could find a roommate who has a very good rental history, and that may fall, the responsibility may fall on their shoulders a bit more, but the landlord may be more trusting that you have someone in the unit who is a little more, they may see them as a little more respectful. There are ways to have a positive rental history and avoid that negative rental history all the way through. Make sure you're paying your rent in full and on time. Make sure the only people living in your home are those whose names are on the lease. Make sure you comply with any house rules at your property and respect the property and your neighbors. Make sure you're keeping your home and the property clean and in good order. And conduct a move out inspection with your landlord to make sure the property looks as good as when you leave as it did when you move in. And through this walkout inspection, this move out inspection, your landlord may be able to point out any issues or damages that could possibly deduct from your security deposit so you can get as much of that deposit back as possible. Here are some ways to cause a negative rental history. Don't pay your rent on time or in full. Have people live with you who are not on the lease. Disregard house rules leading to legal notices being issued. Having loud parties and lacking sensitivity to your neighbor's quiet will lead to both poor rental history and possible police action. Damaging the property will result in costly repairs, and not cleaning your home at move out will result in costly professional cleaning. Your rental history follows you around during your years in Randolph County and surrounding counties and beyond. A poor rental history will likely make it difficult for you to find a good rental in future years. Don't assume you will be okay. Take your rental history seriously. When you're vacating your rental, make sure you're leaving it in the same or better condition than it was in when you first moved in. This will help you get your security deposit back and also help you to build a good rental history. It's important to stay the length of the lease, or early termination fees might be due. Also, it can be difficult to find new housing, so it's helpful to have time to locate new housing before giving notice to the landlord that you'll be moving out. Some basics when it comes to moving out. You should request a pre-move out inspection or walkthrough. If your landlord refuses, confirm that in writing or send a letter confirming the landlord's refusal. Again, during this inspection, the landlord inspects the rental unit with you and identifies conditions that could justify deductions in your security deposit. With this inspection, you are prepared to address these issues in advance of your move out and ideally receive more of your deposit back. Be sure you notify the post offices and your landlord of your forwarding address so that your security deposit can be sent to you after move out. Return all of your keys to your landlord, especially if you made extra copies. Your deposit should be returned to you after any deductions within 60 days of vacating your rental. Any deductions that were charged to you should be itemized. And make sure you're notifying all utility companies that you've moved out so that they can stop that service in your name. As we mentioned, your rental unit should be returned in the same condition that you received it. Picking up and cleaning before guests arrive is typically not the same as cleaning your home before vacating, and this can often take several days to complete. If you fail to clean your rental thoroughly, expect to be charged for professional cleaning services. Landlords typically require carpets to be cleaned professionally, so check your lease before you even rent a carpet shampooer at your local grocery store. A few more cleaning tips include always clean from the top down. For example, when you clean ceiling fan blades, the dust and dirt fall to the ground. If you just mopped your floor, you'll have to do it all over again. Look for dried food along the walls and trims in your kitchen and clean those before you mop the floor. And make sure you're moving your furniture away from the walls when cleaning. When the furniture is moved out, you really don't want any surprises. Never deposit your furniture in the common area or dumpster. The local waste haulers typically offer services at the end of the year for disposal of large items like couches and mattresses. And most property owners discourage tenants from repairing holes in their walls. Ask your landlord what you can and cannot do relating to sheetrock repairs. Unwanted furniture can definitely become a nuisance to deal with, and it can cost you disposal and labor fees if left behind. Consider contacting a local thrift store if the items are in good condition. Ask your landlord if they will be providing a service to dispose of unwanted items. Maybe you have a friend who's looking for a good couch for next year that would be happy to take the items off your hands. And whatever you do, don't leave unwanted furniture in the streets or parking lots. If someone sets your furniture on fire and it is determined that you improperly disposed of that item, that is illegal and you could be charged with a crime up to a felony depending on the consequences of that action. Finally, there are many landlords in our area, some that offer excellent properties and service and others that might not seem so great. Be fair in your assessment of your landlord. Sometimes you might not like their decision, but when you put yourself in their shoes, you might understand the reasons why they make their decisions. If you have a good experience, pass the word along to others so that others might know where the best places are to rent. Property owners who make the effort to provide quality housing deserve to be bragged about. Ensure that a good word is passed on about you to other landlords. Landlords in the area often know each other. Here are some additional housing resources, including Legal Aid of West Virginia, which can help with any legal disputes, the Section 8 Housing Voucher Program, which may be able to help with the cost of rent, and the Highland Community Builders Financial Opportunity Center, which can help with creating a household budget, paying off debts, setting up savings accounts, and even paying off loans as well. I'll give you a moment to write that information down if needed. And finally, we do ask that you take a brief 20-question quiz. If you get 16 or more questions correct, resulting in a score of 80% or higher, you will receive certification for this course that proves that you went through and took the course to learn how to become a good tenant. This link will also be included in the description of this video below. So if you cannot write it down, please feel free to click the hyperlink included. When you complete your quiz, we will receive notification and we will reach out to you within 24 hours to let you know of your grade, as well as to get that certification to you. Thank you so much for attending the Good Tenant course. We hope you learned a lot, and please be welcome to invite your friends, your landlord, whoever you want to take this course. We'd love to have them all.